On November 9, 1989, the world watched in amazement as Germans climbed onto the Berlin Wall with hammers and pickaxes, tearing down the concrete barrier that had divided their city for 28 years. That moment marked the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union and reshaped the entire global order. But what if that wall still stood today? What if the Cold War never ended and the world remained locked in an eternal standoff between two superpowers? Welcome to a reality where the Iron Curtain never lifted. The Berlin Wall fell because of a bureaucratic mistake. On November 9, 1989, East German official Günter Schabowski announced new travel regulations but misunderstood when they would take effect. He said, "Immediately," and thousands of East Berliners rushed to the checkpoints. The confused guards, overwhelmed and without clear orders, opened the gates. But what if Schabowski had read his notes correctly? What if the guards had held firm? What if the Soviet leadership had been more decisive in crushing the protests? Let's explore this chilling alternate timeline where the Cold War never ended. In our timeline, the 1990s were a decade of optimism, the end of history, as one scholar called it. Democracy seemed to have won. Eastern Europe embraced capitalism and freedom. Russia stumbled toward democracy under Boris Yeltsin. In the alternate timeline, none of that happens. The Berlin Wall stands firm. Soviet tanks remain in East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. The small protests of 1989 are violently crushed, just like the Prague Spring in 1968. The world watches in horror, but Western nations, not wanting to risk nuclear war, do nothing but issue strongly worded condemnations. The Soviet Union, seeing that force still works, doesn't collapse. Mikhail Gorbachev is removed from power in 1990, replaced by hardliners who reject glasnost and perestroika. The Communist Party tightens its grip. The KGB expands its surveillance. Political dissidents disappear into gulags. Eastern Europe remains trapped behind the Iron Curtain. East Germany, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, all remain Soviet satellites. Young people in these countries grow up never knowing freedom, watching MTV and Western movies on smuggled VHS tapes, dreaming of a life beyond the wall they'll never experience. In our world, the 2000s saw America as the sole superpower. In the alternate timeline, the Cold War continues at full intensity. The world remains divided into two hostile camps, NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. The arms race never ends. Both sides continue building nuclear weapons. Military budgets consume vast portions of national wealth. The constant threat of nuclear annihilation hangs over humanity. Children in both East and West still practice duck and cover drills in schools. Technology develops differently. Without the peace dividend from the Cold War's end, there's less money for civilian innovation. The internet exists but is more restricted and militarized. Social media as we know it doesn't develop because authoritarian governments would never allow it. The Soviet economy continues its slow decline, but the government keeps it on life support through increasingly desperate measures. Living standards in the East remain far below the West. Grocery stores have empty shelves. Consumer goods are shoddy and scarce. But the propaganda machine insists that socialism is working. Berlin in 2025, in this alternate world, remains a divided city. The wall, now 64 years old, has been reinforced multiple times. It's taller, more fortified, with modern surveillance technology. Cameras, motion sensors, and drones patrol the death strip. West Berlin is a capitalist island of prosperity surrounded by communist territory, still requiring supply convoys to keep it functioning. East Berlin is gray, oppressive, covered in propaganda posters showing happy workers building socialism. Secret police informants are everywhere. People speak in whispers, never knowing who might report them. Families separated in 1961 have now been apart for over 6 decades. Grandparents who fled west have grandchildren they've never met on the eastern side. The human tragedy of division continues generation after generation. West Germany thrives economically but lives under constant military tension. East Germany stagnates but maintains a massive military presence. The border between the two Germanys is the most heavily militarized place on Earth. Today, in this alternate 2025, the world remains locked in Cold War tensions. Russia, still the Soviet Union, continues to be led by Communist Party hardliners. The current General Secretary is probably someone who rose through the ranks during the 1990s, a true believer in the system. Eastern Europe has missed 35 years of development. While Western Europe has high-speed trains, advanced infrastructure, and digital economies, the East remains stuck with 1980s technology. Young people in Warsaw, Prague, and Budapest live in a world that looks like their grandparents' era. The global economy is less interconnected. There's no massive trade with China because China, seeing the Soviets successfully resist change, never opened up either. Instead, China remains isolated and totalitarian. The global supply chains and economic interdependence we take for granted don't exist. The European Union is smaller and weaker. It only includes Western European nations. Without German reunification, there's no powerful united Germany to anchor European integration. The EU is more of a defensive alliance against Soviet aggression than an economic powerhouse. Pop culture is completely different. Without the cultural exchange that followed the Cold War's end, Western and Eastern cultures remain separate. Russians never embraced Western brands. Americans never got interested in Eastern European cinema or literature. The space race continues competitively rather than cooperatively. There's no international space station. Instead, there are rival American and Soviet space stations. The Mars missions being planned by both sides are nationalist competitions, not scientific collaborations. Sports remain politicized. Olympic Games are still boycotted by one side or the other. Athletes are seen as representing ideological systems, not just countries. Defections by Eastern athletes to the West still make headlines. Travel between East and West is nearly impossible for ordinary people. If you're born in East Germany, you'll likely never see Paris, London, or New York. If you're born in America, Moscow and St. Petersburg remain mysterious, forbidden cities. Perhaps most frighteningly, the world lives in constant fear of nuclear war. Every international crisis, conflicts in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, risks escalating into World War III. There have been several close calls, moments when the world held its breath, certain that the missiles were about to fly. Proxy wars continue endlessly. Afghanistan, Vietnam, Korea, these conflicts never truly end, they just shift and evolve. Millions die in wars that are really about the larger struggle between capitalism and communism. The fall of the Berlin Wall wasn't just about one city or one country, it was about the triumph of freedom over oppression, openness over isolation. It ended the nightmare scenario of a world permanently divided, where half of humanity lived under authoritarian control. In our timeline, we take for granted the freedoms won in 1989. We travel freely, access information instantly, and live without fear of the secret police. But in the alternate timeline where the wall still stands, billions of people live in a world of surveillance, restriction, and fear. The wall fell because people refused to accept division any longer. And thank goodness they did, because the alternative would have been a world trapped in perpetual Cold War with no end in sight.